good morning. How is everyone doing? Great. Thanks for being here. Welcome to the last day of our tutorial series in Phoenix. And all the tutorials are being recorded, and they will all be available to all Informs members on the Informs site. So if you are interested, the recording and the chapter will be available. Okay, so today it's my pleasure to welcome Hui, and Hui is going to give us a very interesting, and she's going to talk about a very interesting and important subject. She's going to talk about pharma supply chains and drug shortages this morning. I have known Hui since grad school, and it's really my privilege to introduce her this morning. Hui is a professor of supply chain management and the Charles and Lillian Binder Faculty Fellow at the Smil College of Business at Penn State. Her research applies analytics to align incentives, promote collaboration, and improve efficiency in supply chains. Her work focuses on healthcare, with particular interest in pharma healthcare supply chains, health public policy, and innovations in healthcare systems. Her work has been recognized by many awards, including the Pierre Scala Award and the Ralph Gomery Best Industry Studies Paper Award, among others. Her work has been funded by the DOJ and NSF and other agencies, and it has been published in leading journals. She serves on FDA expert panels and industry advisory boards. Hui, thank you for being with us this morning, and I look forward to your tutorial.
Thank you so much, Ebru, for this very kind introduction. Thank you, everybody, for coming. They said I have to stand there for the recording purpose. I'd rather be closer to you. So today, it's my pleasure to really share with you something that I've been working on for a while, since 2008. It's really dear to my heart, and the purpose of the tutorial is to bring more researchers in this area. So I think many of you would already know the significance of the pharma industry. Let me just go through some of the statistics with you. So it's very crucial because it develops, producing, distributing drugs and other medical products that improve our health well-being. The global pharma market is, like you can see, 1.3 trillion in 2020, and it's going to reach 1.5 to 1.6 trillion by 2025. You can see a lot of these. It is also vital to the economy, and as you can see that it contributed to the GDP for, I have statistics for the US as well as for Europe. Global-wise, it is very important to every nation, I'd say. It provides a significant number of jobs, as you can see, and these numbers right here is only for employees that are involved only in the manufacturing of drugs. So it doesn't include distribution, does not include any downstream ones as well. The U.S. health expenditure has rose to 4.1 trillion. You can find this everywhere. 8.5% of which, are attributed to prescription drug spending. And this is projected to even reach a higher level, as you can see there from these data, from these statistics. As you see that this is a very important industry, I think everybody would agree with me. At the same time, though, we do see pharmaceutical research being, a little bit under research, I say, compared to the hospital operations and by the Informs community. Really, drugs are an indispensable part of healthcare. So if you talk about healthcare, you got the medical services, you got the products like the drugs, right? Compare again to the counterpart of medical services and hospital operations, definitely the pharmaceutical side has been under-researched. We also know the efficiency of the pharma supply chain directly affects to the quality of and the cost of patient care. At the same time, again, is under research. So what have been some of the reasons? So that has been, some of the questions that I asked myself, some of the questions that I talked to industry people. I've come up with a few of them. I'm sure like we have had very senior researchers in the audience as well. I mean, this is an ongoing sort of topic. One of the things that I would ascribe this to is the complexity of the industry. In a bit, I'll try to introduce the different stages of the supply chain. At the same time, this industry is also facing very unique economic as well as regulatory environment. At the same time, you find that this industry is relatively closed, even though that they're facing a lot of challenges. And the reason I feel like they are relatively closed is because efficiency, cost-related stuff, and supply chain really was not the major part of competency in this industry, right? So the two pillars in the industry is R&D and marketing. For the drug industry, for years it's been like that. But this situation is changing as the downstream or as the whole society is putting more pressure on, the high spending on drugs. And as they started to cut, R&D, and hopefully they don't cut that much, as they start to cut marketing, but these are their core competence, and eventually they wanted to make their supply chain more efficient. So here we go. That's the opportunity for us, the Informs community. So I think really this is great opportunities. But again, like because of these relatively closed, and you do see a lot of signs in that industry, right? But most of that is on the medical side, on the chemical side, on the drug discovery side, and less on the supply chain. When I use the word supply chain, I meant really for the value chain, that I'm using a broader term here. It does not just mean like it started from manufacturing and it goes down to the end users. I meant, the whole value chain. In a bit, I will introduce them. So this tutorial is my goal to help a little bit of the Informs community to understand a bit more of this value chain, and then from which we're together as a community we're able to tackle more problems that would benefit this industry as well as benefit our community in terms of our contribution to the society. I want to say that I won't be able to cite all the papers that have appeared in a lot of journals that in our field that contributed to pharmaceutical related stuff. There has been a lot of that, even though that this is an area under research, we do still have tremendous, really good papers there. I'm sorry that I won't be able to cite all the papers. The purpose of the tutorial as well as today's presentation is to give some examples that would show the nature of the problems and so on and so forth, and potential research possibilities. All right, so here's the outline of my tutorial. I would want to have an overview of the pharma value chain at the beginning. And then I want to focus on the unique characteristics, because for years, I started pharma research since 2008. And for the years, I always have people asking me, what is unique about pharma supply chain? Is that just, that just sounds like a different industry. Why is that different? Why is that unique? So for a long time, I've been thinking about this, so I'll share you some of the thoughts that I thought that are unique characteristics of this industry or of the pharma value chain, more from the research point of view. So this whole tutorial is, again, aimed for researchers. So I'll share a lot of these things in translating what the terminology from the pharma industry into maybe the words and the terms that we would be more familiar with. Okay, and then I would look at research on brand name drug supply chains, again, value chain, what I mean. I'll give a few examples there. And then I'll look at research on the generic drug supply chain, and for which I will use the drug shortage as one major area of research in the generic supply chain. I will potentially, throughout that, I will potentially use these examples to show you the misaligned incentives that's going on. So that's part of my goal. And at the end, I wanted to summarize, and definitely the written tutorial has more information that you can check out. All right, a little bit of overview of the pharma supply chain. It is a complex system, as you will see. It includes multiple stages I will introduce in a bit. And these multiple stages, each of these multiple stages would have its own stakeholders, and which I'll introduce as well. They have their own processes and they have their own regulations. And all of these are potential research topics. I'm going to focus mainly on the US system, which I'm the most familiar with. I have looked into a bit into the European system as well as the Chinese system. They're different, but some of the things you will see that some of the root things are similar, or a lot of these incentive issues are probably similar. But I want to say that this is mainly focused on the US system. Okay, I have come up with this very simplified version of the supply chain, of the pharma chain. So start from here, like you have the manufacturer, the drug manufacturer, who may or may not be the developer. And there's a lot of research in this area as well. There's in the new product development area, there's a stream of research talking about the contracts between the drug developers and the manufacturers when they have joint venture and all kinds of different arrangements. Right, and then the manufacturers could produce this in-house or could contract to CMO, which is the contract manufacturer organizations, right? And then so this is the manufacturing side. So, and after the drug is approved, going through the approval process, which I will come to this stage in a bit later, then they come to wholesale and distributing. And the wholesale distributing would physically move these things, right? And then coming to either the retailers or online platforms, which is I call them e-tailers, or coming to providers, or these retailers are just like CVS, Walgreens, those that you already are familiar with, or they come to the hospital side, where hospital would have a pharmacy themselves, and then they would dispense these to the patients. All right, and then you would see that some intermediaries here, and the GPOs who represent their members. GPOs is just group purchasing organization, who represent their downstream providers, mostly hospitals, right? So the hospitals subscribe to their membership, so they just represent them, and because of the volume collection, then they would negotiate some like discounts with the manufacturer. So this is the price negotiator, really. And then you have the PBM, which is the Pharmacy Benefit Manager. It sounds like singular, but it's really an organization as well. They represent, they help in the insurance to set up formulary. The formulary means that, so when you buy health insurance, and on the drug side, you know that there's tiers. Those are called the formulary. Basically, if this drug is generic, it's going to be on a lower tier, which typically means smaller co-payment from the patients. So that's the formulary. And then the PBM is helping. One of their major functions is helping the insurance to set up these formularies, as well as representing the insurance part to negotiate price with the manufacturers. So you see, these are very important intermediaries. And then for the whole thing, right, here that you have patients, and payment is a very important part of the whole value chain. And the payments like goes through mostly insurance companies. And I'll talk each of these stages a little more in detail in a bit. Right. As you see that in the whole value chain, the regulator is here, right? It regulates every step. And we hope the regulator is there because these are not just consumer, like other consumer products, these are drugs, and they also play different roles at different stages, and we'll talk about them as well. All right, so that's just an oversimplified version of the pharma supply chain. Okay, let's look at these stages. So the first stage is the research and development, where the drugs are developed. I summarize that this stage has three very important characteristics. One, high cost. You can see the average investment per new drug doubled every 7.5 years from 1960 to 2010. And this is reaching 2.6 billion per new drug. And this is not even a very new statistic as well. Second is high risk. 1 out of 5,000 compounds tested in a lab is eventually approved. So this is actually called the Valley of Death. I think many of you have seen this funnel shape approval, right? Starting from the lab stage into eventual approval. Also, you have long duration. This long duration definitely would exacerbate this cost and risk involved. There are 3 phases of clinical trials before approval. That's taking on average 10 to 12 years. At the same time, most manufacturers or drug developers would have the drug patent when it's promising that they want to be the first to already put them under patent. And the whole patent is only 20 years. So think about 10 to 12 years. They're still in the approval stage, leaving only 8 to 10 years for the manufacturers to recoup all the costs and make a profit. That to some extent explains some of the high cost of drugs. I wanted to put this out like the second bullet here. Each additional day a drug spent in a clinical trial costs manufacturers from $600,000 for niche drugs to $8 million for blockbuster drugs. So that's significant. So anything you can do to shorten this clinical trial time would be very extremely helpful to the pharma industry, as you can tell. Okay, so the combination of the above, think about the combination of the above, of these 3 characteristics, right? High cost, high risk, and long duration. That adds a lot of pressure on the drug developer or manufacturer. A lot of times it's manufacturer at the end. All right. It also calls them a lot of expertise to get these drugs through the clinical phases. There is a phase 4 clinical trial, which is the post-market study. Okay. All right. That also means that a lot of these pharma companies are probably going to put their investment into drugs that they're more sure of, right? And less of the effort will be put on rare disease or orphan drugs, which means that the population is smaller. These are all problems, potential topics, right? And later I'll give you examples. There are different research projects going on, research going on for a lot of these different issues. So also, there's big difference between brand name versus generic drugs. Later, you see, like I separate these 2 supply chain problems because that they just face very different challenges. So for the brand name drugs, obviously the R&D is super important. For the generic drug manufacturers, they just need to, after the drug is on the market from the brand drug, and they just get it back, and all they need to do is to figure out with the finished product already to find ways to just produce, just equivalent drugs. So their approval process is much smaller investment. It's much shorter as well. Hence, like the competence advantage is very different for these two types of drug companies. So the brand drug companies are definitely the leader of the industry. They're definitely the leader versus like the generic is usually the followers. It's more cost driven for the generic companies, but it's more innovation driven for the manufacturers. As you can think, like as researchers that we now think that the objectives are very different, their challenges are very different as well. Okay, so the second stage is that once the drug is approved, it's going through the manufacturing stages, right? This is the mass production of drugs, right? Packaging, labeling. They usually go through from manufacturing them to packaging and labeling, right? And so these are also like on the supply chain very important entities as well. You will find that drug products are usually fairly complex, meaning like, the raw material, the API, what we call the API is different from the software company where the API means something else. Here, the API means the active pharmaceutical ingredients, so that they're real stuff, right? And then there's the excipients, which is the sugar coating. You can think about the sugar coating. They could all come from various different places around the world, right? And they all may be produced at different places to make the final product. However, all of these will need to be regulated. Remember that, right? Like when it's sourced, it needs to be regulated. Well, it is regulated. You have to, when your drug's getting approval, you have to put those on file. And those are all potential hurdles if you want to increase your capacity, if you want to deal with different problems. So think about all these will come into play. And later on, when we talk about drug shortages, all of these are contributors to that problem. Okay, again, I mentioned this, like when you manufacture them, you can think about in-house versus CMOs, right? And the CMOs are the contract manufacturing organizations. They're very typically used. Again, the CMOs need to be regulated, right? And then so on and so forth. Okay, all the manufacturing processes have to meet the regulatory requirements for adherence to what is called current good manufacturing practices. So these are the regulations about them. Okay, so there's a quality caveat here as well when we talk about manufacturing, right? So what is the quality caveat here? Well, think about if you purchase other consumer products, right? Let's say you bought a TV, you bought a phone, you bought whatever, and you come back and you use it, you can tell whether it's good quality or bad quality, right? What about drugs? Can you tell? No, because if it works, great. If it doesn't work, it may not be the drug. It may be patient heterogeneity, right? And even worse is that, can you tell how much API was there in the drug that you're taking? No way. Suppose it should be 95% of API. Can you tell if it's 90%? 85? 80? 50? 30? No. Sometimes you don't even know how your real drug looks like. All right, so these are potential problems. And I'd done one piece on counterfeiting, and some of you probably are interested in counterfeiting. So that's the problem, right? That is the problem, right? Okay, so about distributing, like after that, they're going through the distributing stage, right? And the distributing are usually the wholesalers, the distributors, right? There are different types of channels, right? One channel is the traditional wholesalers that you can think about. The other is what is called specialty distributors. And specialty distributors are the distributors that specialized in handling specialty drugs. What is a specialty drug? That's a terminology. And well, the complexity of specialty drug is that there's not even an agreed upon definition of specialty drugs. So just to help you a little bit, and we have a paper on distribution channels for specialty drugs where we explain this a little more. And you can, I'll give you, it's Xu et al. 2023, where we had more details. But just to help a little bit to facilitate our discussion here. So specialty drugs, just think about those mostly bio-based, right? When you have bio-based, and that means they're usually light or temperature sensitive, and there are a lot of issues, cold chain, all these come into play, right? So there is a difference between traditional and specialty distributors. I just want to mention that. So the manufacturers choose, okay, and then also, unlike retail platforms that like a lot of our informed community is familiar with, here the manufacturers decide, they choose their distribution channels to best reach for their products to reach the downstream, right? So the manufacturers actually choose the channel. Like in the retail, it's more, as retailers, not as retailers, as consumers, we pretty much choose where we buy these drugs, right? Not that we as the end users, consumers, we choose where to buy these consumer products. Like Amazon, you can choose online, you can choose going through some other physical stores and so on and so forth. So we, the consumers. But here, the manufacturer needed to ensure the integrity of distribution channel so that the safety and efficacy of the drugs are not changed in the process of being distributed, right? So like you cannot decide, like you and I, we cannot decide where to buy our drugs, and we go by where our insurance allows us. At the same time, the insurance actually will need to know where the manufacturers going through, like where their channels are, right? So these are, again, somewhat different as well. So yeah, this is the paper that we published. It took us a very long time. Again, like a lot of these pieces, unfortunately, are taking a little bit longer as we have to explain to the review team exactly what they are and what the contributions are, right? Okay, so in that one, we actually looked at the selection of the distribution channel for specialty drugs, right? And then there's a wholesaler, there's the specialty distributor, and we look at the access versus control problem, which obviously is very a primary problem for the pharma industry. The accessibility as well as the control means that I wanted to have better control of my distribution chain such that the safety and integrity of my drug are not changed, as I just mentioned. Okay. So, and then we come to dispensing. Dispensing just means like these retail pharmacies that you already know, right? Here, like I wanted to mention just you have the traditional retail setting, which is CVS, Walgreens. At the same time, you have online pharmacies, right? Online pharmacies, obviously they're convenient, right? A lot of times you can also shop for lower priced ones, right? But the caveat, right? The caveat, in one of these papers that we look at the caveat because unfortunately, 85% of the online pharmacies are illegal, right? Illicit ones. And this is an open research question. I'd welcome any discussions on this. Very, very difficult problem because you actually don't even know where this online servers are, right? And when you push them down, they pop up at a different URL tomorrow. And the paper that we had, well, again, we know this problem, and for researchers next is said, what is a good research question, right? The angle that we took in that paper was identifying these places is even a problem because the on average 20 of them pop up every day, new ones, and who knows how many are going down, and they kept switching places, URLs, and so that's a huge problem. All right, okay, and then finally, unused products, you cannot, or you're not supposed to throw them in your trash can. you're supposed to return them somewhere, right? And then you unused products from the businesses, like meaning like the retailers and so on, right? They're not supposed to throw, they will not, because there's regulation about that. They have to be disposed according to regulations as well, right? These are all problems, right? These are all things that I'm hoping that our community will be able to research on. Okay, and then in the pharma value chain, we cannot not talk about payments, right? We have to talk about payments. As you all know that you as the consumer, the end consumer, you're not the major payer, right? And the typical payers are right, the insurance companies, employers, like if you belong to a big university, they're probably self-insured, and the government agencies who has a very different, just various different programs, right? Okay, you only share a very small part of the payment. Yeah, so all this is telling you that the payment arrangements distort the incentives in many of these problems, right? In many of these problems. Okay. All right. Other intermediaries, I already talked about these. I will not get into more, but definitely like the GPOs and the PBMs, they are all very interesting, controversial intermediaries. Yeah, we have some work on GPOs, and we have done some work about formulary, which belongs to under the umbrella with the PBM. Okay, and then the regulator. Throughout the supply chain, the regulator plays different roles, like in the R&D stage, right? They approve the drugs, right? And later they're regulating the manufacturing processes, and they're regulating the distribution, the dispensing. So like in your work might be specifically for the regulator, and then they will be a decision maker. Or your work might be looking at the interventions that they do. You suggest interventions, or you might be looking at the impact of their interventions. So they're taking various different roles. All right, so here comes the salient challenges in the pharmaceutical supply chains. All right, so this is my thoughts on when we answer the question of others. So why is pharmaceutical supply chain unique, right? And I come up with 3 different challenges here. So first is the welfare challenge. It is very unlikely in your supply chain that every party is profit driven. Unlike our traditional or other supply chains, most of the players are profit driven. Here you have at least one or multiple entities who are welfare driven. So that brings a very different focus, techniques, solutions, right? Second one is incentive one, which I have been alluded to all through, that you have the incentive challenge where, and this is for all healthcare problems, the buyers may not be the payers, and the price setters may be neither the buyer nor the seller. As you can see, the intermediaries a lot of times take the role as the seller, as the price center. And these just further distort the incentive interests along the value chain. All right, and finally, you have the regulation challenge, because when you have regulations, when you have interventions, there's also the policy resistance, right? And then it is adding to the distortions, and so the combination of that, the combination of all 3 challenges together sort of define the pharmaceutical value chain. At the same time, this also defines the contributions of the research work. Okay. So hopefully so far I have already presented to you, like this is a very rich field for research. You have a full value chain here from all these stages, right? Correspondingly, you have so many different players, as I listed here, and they all have different objectives, and you're trying to align at least some of them, their incentives. So also the research problems can be in very different sort of flavor, because you are dealing with R&Ds, you are dealing with production capacity, you are dealing with retail online platforms, you are dealing with contracts, incentives, you are dealing with public policy and the interventions. And you could see that the informs community have all these tools. I mean, we have seen all these in different other places, and maybe we can shape our tools into workaround questions in this, right? And your questions can also be tactical to strategic, all right? Also, the regulations which I've mentioned, and then finally, there are many different types of pharma products, right? I've mentioned a few. I've mentioned that you can sort of divide them by brand name versus generic. You can also divide them by traditional versus specialty, right? There's personalized medicine as well, therapy, and you can divide them into vaccines versus non-vaccines. By the way, the tutorial is not going to focus on vaccines versus non-vaccines, because vaccine research has been its stream that has actually been in our field for a while. They have very different sort of set of goals and so on and so forth. And in the tutorial, like I provided some review articles for vaccines if you're interested in vaccines. All right, so let's get to the research on brand name drugs. So I'm in the tutorial, I'm dividing to brand name and the generic drug value chain. So for the brand name, again, like you can decide on to work on many different problems. I'm going to focus on two streams of work. One, because as I mentioned to you, like what are the biggest challenges for brand drugs, right? One is R&D. And the other is the high drug price, right? That's talked daily on, not daily, but so frequently in the news media, right? Okay, so I also have shown you that each day in clinical trial, right? Each day in clinical trial could save $600,000 to $8 million for these manufacturers. So obviously they're very, very interested in this kind of things. All right. So one stream of research has been looking at alternative drug approval policies, because the traditional ones has those three challenges, right? Three, like high cost, high risk, and long duration, right? So what have there been research, right, on alternative drug approval policies? So I'm going to get into for each of these two bullets, I'm going to get into some examples of the research that has been done. Okay, let's look at the alternative drug approval policy. So you have two different things you can look at, right? One is that, okay, there are some existing alternative policy. Do they work? Why not, right? Do you have any solutions? So that's the first bullet. And I'll introduce a paper that actually is this kind. The second is, can we propose new policies, right? So that I have cited some here. Like one of this is to propose the disease-specific standards. And so that's like, yeah, for example, like instead of every drug has the same standard for approval, can we now use data-driven ones, and we can propose the disease-specific standards? So that's the second bullet. Okay, let me get to the first one with an example. So, this is one of my papers, hence like I'm most familiar with that. I use that as an example here. So this example looks at the accelerated approval policy, which has been under a lot of attention in 2021 when the drug for Alzheimer was approved under accelerated approval policy. We presented this paper in 2020 in FDA about this AP policy. So what was the problem? So the problem was that this policy was already enacted in 1992 for promising drugs targeted at unmet medical needs. By granting early approval, with the exchange of that, then the the manufacturers are required to do post-market study to verify the true benefit, right? What happened then? Many manufacturers do not comply with this. All right, so this very well-intentioned program then was not very much very well utilized just because of this, because the statistics is stunning, right? Over 50% of these drugs were these either the post-market study were never started or they were just lingering around forever, right? So this paper looked at, okay, what are the various reasons, right? And we found that in addition to these, the things that is pretty obvious, like once the drug is on the market, nobody wants to invest it anymore, right? But in addition to that, there's a lot more to that story. One of them is that actually the drug is on the market, hence it is very hard to recruit trial patients anymore, right? And then there was another one that's even worse, that even if you have a deadline for the post-market study, there's no way to enforce the deadline once the drug is on the market, right? So these are all, just the challenges facing this. So hence, in this paper, we actually distilled all these different incentive problems and challenges coming from asymmetric information, right? And the moral hazard and the imperfect enforceability of the deadlines. And then we looked at how to resolve this problem. And then we looked at a numerical analysis, where that we could look at how to resolve this problem, show the impact of that. Right, so let's look at high drug prices, right? So there are two types of research as well. The first is that you can look at the impact of high drug prices, which I'll get into a little bit, just to introduce the problem a bit. And then also, how do you pay for these, right? The new payment studies. So for the payment studies, and then these are talk about new payments, and this is talking about subsidy payments for rare disease drugs, right? So let me get into a little bit about the drug prices, right? The drug prices have been increasing. So the red bars are the percentage annual increase of the brand drugs, and then compared to the blue bars are the inflation rate, right? This has profound implication in the industry. What is that? So distributors did not earn money or their margin from distribution services. Rather, they're making their major margin from speculation. So right before the price went up, they would speculate. And we all know what that is, right? Like from the manufacturer, you see spikes of these orders, and then nothing, no order, and then spikes, and so on and so forth, right? And this was stopped, but it was only after this was changed. We give that a very nice name. We call it investment buying model. So this investment buying model was changed to a fee-for-service model where the distributors are now getting their margin from distribution services. So there are a couple of papers on this to talk the specifics about how this was impacting the supply chain. And then the second one was talking about a modeling paper talking about, how do you set up these fee-for-service contracts? And there's still lots of problems around this, and this is still ongoing. Like investment buying is still ongoing, although it's much reduced. All right, new payments. The new payments that have been studied, the outcome-based reimbursement for these high drug price. So if these drug prices are high, so insurance don't want to cover them, and then now the manufacturers now, they propose, okay, how about outcome-based, right? So only those will pay if the drug is effective. Otherwise, I'll give you a rebate. Right? These are called outcome-based. So Adita in our audience here, that we also have a paper on this one as well. So collectively, let me show you what are the things that are considered, right? These papers need to consider uncertainty in the drug effectiveness, patient heterogeneity, formulary design, alternative treatments, insurer and patient risk attitudes, and refund split between insurer and patients. So these are the things that are being considered. But obviously, like there are a lot of trade-offs in the payment area. This payment area is still a very rich area for research. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's get to generic drug. So for the generic drugs, I'm going to use the drug shortages as an example. As I mentioned, the generics faces very different problems. Drug shortages is one of the really bad, challenging problems. So let me give you some sense of the current situation of the US drug shortages, one of the most challenging, persistent public health problems facing the US society. My continued conversation with the FDA is that we're not really resolving this problem, right? We are coming up with things and to try to resolve. This is a long-term problem. So the number of drugs on shortage tripled from 2005 to 2010 to reach 456 in 2011 when it peaked for the first time. And after that, in 2012, there was the drug shortage program in place. Then it was sort of contained, right, until in 2018, it goes up to another sort of peak, right? So even after that, it's persistent at more than 200 drugs in shortage at any point of the time. Through the time that the data was through 2021, and unfortunately many of these problems have become chronic problems, right? Habitual chronic problems for shortages, right? Okay, so I'll give causes and reasons in a bit, right? So the average shortage duration is from 9 months. Averaged 9 months in 2011 when GAO gave the report to 14 months in 2016 when GAO gave another report, right? So this is crazy. And why do we not know about that? Or the question is why would US, such a plentiful country, would have drug shortage? You would not think that we would have that problem. A lot of these drugs, I'll talk a little bit more, but a lot of these drugs initially are cancer drugs or drugs targeting at a smaller population. Hence that unless that you have that cancer or your friends or your families, that you actually don't know that the problem exists, right? So this is a problem. It's been there for so long, but that just it's still going on dramatically, right? And then what about the industry? Does the industry suffer? Yes. And you would see that 75% of the 300 purchasing agents who are surveyed in this one said they reported delayed treatment due to drug shortages. Think about if you or your family undergoes drug shortage and have cancer, is doing a cancer treatment. An average shortage duration 9 months. Now it's 14 months, right? Can you believe what the impact that is on patients, right? Okay, so they reported delayed treatments due to drug shortages. 47% said patients received a less effective drug. What else can you do, right? And 50% experienced more than 20 drugs on shortage in the last 6 months. They induced significant labor. Why? Because now most providers, hospitals, would have specific teams of people who work on drug shortages. These are people, if this drug is on shortage, how do we source the drug, or what do we do? And then how do we have substitutes, and how do we use substitutes? How do we work with, how do we coordinate with the physicians, and so on and so forth. So much, right? Extensive, covered by the media. As of this year, in 2023, in June time, it again hit headlines again, right? Okay, let's look at the root causes for drug shortages. I'm getting these 3 root causes from the FDA report. Okay. So the first is like this, like low incentives to produce some of these less profitable generic drugs, right? Okay, I want to give you a little bit idea of what we talk about. So what are they? Like, what is the less profitable generic drugs? Okay, so we typically don't have a lot of shortages for branded drugs just because the brand drug margin is high and the manufacturers don't want these drugs to be on shortage, right? So if they're on shortage, they're because of some other reasons. I'll talk a little bit about other reasons. Okay, so but these are less profitable. Look at these are usually old generics with low profit margin. Old, okay, they're long off patent. The median years since approval is 35 years for these drugs on shortage. They're low profit, they're cheap. And look at this, the median unit price right before going on shortage was 8.73. This is from the FDA report 2019, and later was revised in 2020. So think about, this is not Tylenol. We're not talking about Tylenol. These are prescription drugs, $8.73 unit price. Can you believe that, right? So, okay, so these are a lot of these drugs, for example, injectables, they also require very complex manufacturing processes, right? So here we go with this combination. On the one hand, you have low profit. On the other hand, it seems like quality problems could be huge because of the complexity in the manufacturing processes, right? Okay, so the combination of that means that you really don't have many manufacturers who want to produce these drugs, right? This very high supply market concentration there. You can read this 40% of these drugs on shortage are actually supplied by only one manufacturer, right? And then also you barely have sufficient capacity, and a lot of these manufacturing facilities look like this, like they have multiple of these drug producing lines, and each of the line can actually produce multiple different drugs. And if these ones are the low profit ones, right, the low profit ones, and then the capacity allocated to these drugs obviously is not going to be very high. These low profit margin, and I mean, obviously, this means that it's very hard, challenging to maintain quality, right? Now, on top of that comes the second root cause. I mean, think about this, right? To maintain quality at the same time, we talked about as consumers, you have no way to tell what the quality is. And even worse than that, right? The lack of recognition and the reward for manufacturers' mature quality management systems. What does that mean? It means actually there's no transparency. Lack of transparency actually even challenge in assessment. Think about, we do have regulations, but those are minimum requirements, right? But on top of that, like, we don't really know how to assess quality after the minimum requirement, and how do you differentiate? And there's lack of transparency even about quality data. And then there's lack of market reinforcement, such as very weak fail to supply clause. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a bit. But think about, like, there's no market recognition or reward to quality in pharma. Right? So it's not like you can charge a higher price if you provide better quality. Okay, the third root cause is the logistic and regulatory challenges. This would hinder the prompt recovery after disruption, because if you have a disruption, quality disruption or others, right, it takes longer time to come back to recovery because, first of all, the complexity of the supply chain. And anytime you want to increase capacity, anytime you want to source it to a different business, like, this needs to be approved, right? So this is all contributing to all these problems. All right. So those are the root causes, those three. What are the direct causes? The root causes means that, if you don't resolve these problems, it's going to be here. The direct cause means that in reality, what triggered, right? Quality disruption is big trigger. a lot of these, right? Increasing demand, right? Like in COVID time that we have seen those, right? Increasing in demand, natural disasters. If they just like tsunami, like they made some of these locations, the production line down because there's no other capacity, right? 40% of them are have sole source, and then here comes the problem. Discontinuation. A lot of time, discontinuation decisions come from, again, low profitability and so on and so forth, right? Reimbursement policy, GPO role, there's a lot of discussions of that. Those are still open questions. There has been limited research on the solutions, and we do have lots of literature, and I do want to mention, like Emily Tucker has a very nice review article, and she reviews like in not just in our field, but there's actually lots of literature, right, in healthcare field, health, econ, and a lot of different fields. Like she has a really nice report on that. The literature in our field has been limited, and literature are in 3 groups, right? Like those, I'm using Emily Tucker's way of like dissect the literature, like the causes, right? The impacts. Can you quantify the impacts? Can you look at other causes, right? Can you come up with the solutions? What I find is that there are very limited rigorous literature on solutions and an evaluation of solutions. I listed a few here that are like currently like what. I wanted to use this one. This is our first piece. It started in 2011. Didn't get published until 2017. But this one was winning a couple of awards that was cited in the FDA report 2019. Okay, so the research objective for this one is to propose possible solutions, right? So at that time, it was more of, people were suggesting, okay, just increase the drug price. Right, we know that won't work because if you don't have any other handles on this problem, just increase the price is not going to work. So, but they have overlooked these weak fail to supply clauses. For example, like in the time, so they do have these fail to supply clauses in their contract. The problem is that they usually say, we'll pay the difference. We'll pay the difference if you can source it somewhere else. But in times of drug shortages, you can't source it anywhere else, right? So that means only 10% of these are recovering 10%, recovers only 10% of the buyer losses. So the fail to supply was equivalent to not existing almost, right? So what we proposed in this paper was actually very simple. We just say, well, you pair your reasonable price increase with, strengthened fail to supply. And all right, very straightforward. What are the challenges? First of all, what is the impact? Because we're saying increase the price a bit, but at the same time, give a more strengthened fail to supply, right? So what is the implication for all these different parties that, as I mentioned in the supply chain research, that you have to look at all the players that are affected, right? What is the impact on the drug manufacturer? What is the impact on the GPO, on the buyer, on the government? Because government now have to pay higher. Is that true or not true, right? So our goal was to come up with some kind of contracting so that we can have a Pareto improving impact on all these different parties. So obviously we will need to then model all their objective functions. The other one is that you have this triangle, right? When you increase the price a bit, your capacity will increase, your inventory hopefully will increase, but they work as substitutes as well. So eventually, would this really work, right? Okay, so the model features, basically, you have several levels of the entangled decisions. First of all, you come up with that. So the first line is basically, this is your contract. You have a price and you have a fail to supply penalty here. And then based on this, and then the drug manufacturer will decide their capacity, right? And then based on the capacity, they'll decide their production, inventory decisions, and so on and so forth, right? And the model would also need to have a few key characteristics of drug shortages. First of all, is the capacity-dependent disruptions, which means that if you have a higher capacity, right, then the disruption rate will go down. Later that we will need to use like some kind of data to model this. And then also you have uncertain recovery time from disruptions. Once it goes on disruption, we also have a combination of back orders and lost sales, right? All right, so I'll give you the key results here. We have to first of all solve for the manufacturer's optimal production inventory decisions as well as capacity the decisions. And based on those, you come up with the objective for each of these parties, right? Like the manufacturers, the GPOs, the providers, and the government agency. Then you have to, as a function of P and S, you look at we would need to characterize how their objective function change with these contract parameters. And eventually from this, and now we'll need to characterize these Pareto improving contract, right? And then after the analytical part that we need to do a very detailed numerical one where we will need to use the data. I listed data sources here to eventually to come up to look at each of the parties and what happens to them, right? So I wanted to quickly show you. So basically between these blue and green curve, this is the Pareto improving. In between is the Pareto improving area. But we don't want the price to go this high, right? So we wanted to cut at 30%. Like if we only allow 30% of drug price increase, right? So I'm going to look at just this triangle right here, right? So we look at this, and then this one is just that triangle, right? This is the Pareto improving one. So this is the ISO profit for the manufacturing. This is the ISO spending for the government when they pay for these drugs. A lot of these are Medicare, right? Okay, so this is the Pareto improving. And interestingly, this line, this green line is almost like down to zero, right? This also really mimics when you increase the price but not increase the y-axis is the penalty. So this means, this is like the strategy, what people advocated for. Okay, let's just increase the price. Okay, so eventually, all right, let's look at it. If you just increase the price, would capacity go up? We want the capacity to go up. So this is what our proposal is. This is the if you just increase the price, right? You see that this one does not increase the capacity that much. And this is about the inventory, right? So the good thing is that, right, as the triangular effect, as I showed you, in fact, if you just increase the price, then because of the substitution, so inventory does not go up to help. But if you use the proposed contract, the inventory does go up and the capacity does go up. And this just tells you that the shortages are going down, right? Okay. So the results is like across all these parameter combinations we tested, increasing the price by 30% maximum with the corresponding optimal contract parameters of the fail to supply. It can lead to minimum of 25%, an average of 54%, and a maximum of 70% of reduction for shortages. Okay, so what have we learned? We presented this in 2014 to the FDA. What have we learned? First, increasing price doesn't seem to be very effective, right? And what we have shown, and this is actually still true nowadays for reward quality, is that in line with the FDA's strategic plan to reward quality, remember, quality is very hard to assess. Like the product quality is very hard to assess, and there's no transparency for that still till today. Still now through today, right? The FDA is strongly pushing in that direction to have a quality transparency system, but they're still in the working stage, right? But this one shows that but tracking the reliability of your supply chain in terms of back orders, in terms of lost sales, is very easy, and that is actually the basis of some of the industry right now. One of the companies that we work with at Risk, they're actually doing this. They ask the manufacturers to report to them, like the back order lost sales, and hence based on those, they track the quality, right? The reliability of the supply chain. And we talk to industry, and then they find this contracting is intriguing, and the reason being the following. This is very insightful for us. We didn't think that way, at least. because remember, it's the GPO who is negotiating these contracts, right? The GPOs are evaluated by bringing down the price, but they're not assessed by preventing shortages. Do you see that? That's the incentive distortment, because they said, okay, this is great about the shortages, but this does not help me because I'm evaluated by the price, and you're actually saying I pay a little bit higher price with the return of better reliability of the supply, right? So that was intrigued. This is the exact wording from them, right? So this tells us like, something like the current work of us was like, not only is that, but even the short-term benefit is bad if GPOs only contracting based on price, right? Okay, so here comes my conclusion. I hope that I was able to show you that this is a very rich field, obviously. I hope that I give you a little bit of basic idea of the pharma supply chain, right? And drug shortages definitely require more research, and we're happy to see increasing attention from the field, right? And from modeling as well as the empirical side as well. There are some very exciting new things coming up in the industry as well, which are some new areas of research, definitely biologics, I mentioned, online pharmacies and its caveat, personalized medicine, digitalization, and AI. These are all open areas for research, just as in the others, right? Highly regulated, hence a lot of your research, like my research, would have some kind of implication for policy, right? The written, all right. Sorry that I'm mumbling through that. I think I have quite some slides to go through, but I think we have a few minutes for questions.
Thank you. I found it very interesting. Yeah, so we have a couple of minutes for questions.
Thank you. Very, very interesting talk, and with a great overview of everything that's going on. So I wanted to ask if you had any thoughts about sort of the role of GPOs, and to some extent understand some of the trade-offs of that organizations face through purchasing directly versus GPOs.
Yes, very good question. GPOs is very controversial, and there are some early papers, if you look at the literature, actually from the law area, and looking at, should GPO even exist, right? I mean, I think the pharma industry allowed it to exist, and there are some regulations that allows them to exist. But even till today, like some people ascribe the shortages are like GPOs played some roles in that, like because like they were getting down the prices, which part of the low incentive, like the low incentives for the manufacturers to produce these drugs. Yes, I mean, I think there have been a couple of papers on GPOs that in our field, looking at the controversial sort of role of GPOs, definitely in an open area. We have a current paper that also looks into the GPOs in terms of pricing and things like that. Yeah, definitely. I would also want to share with you, working in the pharma area can be also controversial, meaning like for example, I had a podcast with a news media on drug shortages, and then the next day I got yelled at by an older person who called me saying, "I'm going to call your dean to get you fired," and so on and so forth. I think he doesn't understand how our system works, but I think he was lobbying for certain entities that he thinks this whole thing is about GPO, like he was like condemning GPOs to be playing a major role. If you don't agree with him, or if you didn't say that enough, and he would yell at you. So it is an open question, interesting. Yeah, definitely. GPOs is also a very loose structure. So many hospitals would belong to multiple GPOs and so on and so forth. There were some details about that as well. Yeah. Very good question.
Thanks for the excellent presentation. And I have to say, I actually had a similar experience of getting yelled at by somebody, especially when it comes to the role of GPO. So my question is, to what degree is there, I don't know whichever entity it is, GPO or some other entity, in terms of price setting? Because I'm under the impression that prices are also highly regulated. So you came up with the model of linking the price increase with failure, the quality measures. So I wonder how much of your model could actually reflect reality in terms of price not, in some cases not being able to, the entities not being able to change the price if there's any regulation related to it.
Mm-hmm. Very good question. So in the US, my understanding is that prices are not regulated. In Europe and in some other countries, that prices are regulated. So in the US, they're not regulated. And then when we talk about price or anything, right, you have to think about, are we talking about brand drugs or generic drugs, right? So for brand drugs, manufacturer is the king. It's monopoly. They would say, this is it, right? There's nowhere to get the same drug, this drug anywhere else. So GPOs really does not have much say there. So we're talking about, so in these pieces that I presented, and mostly that we're talking about generic drugs, where the GPOs would represent the downstream hospitals to have a say. A lot of times because generics face it's a cost-driven, it's a price competition sort of environment for the generic manufacturers. Hence, GPOs has a lot to say in that realm. In terms of the brand drugs, that's where the high drug prices, because most of what we call the high drug prices, these are the new drugs, right? The newly developed drugs, newly approved drugs. These prices are just, very, very high. So, but for those drugs, the manufacturers really set the price, right? And that's where just now that I had a slide on the outcome-based reimbursement. I mean, it's not really reimbursement, it's the outcome-based pricing, the outcome-based rebates. So the reimbursement is really the rebate from the manufacturers to the insurers or the patients if the drug did not work as it should be. They have a set goal for this to work at the target level. If it didn't achieve the target level, then they would reimburse or they would rebate. So that's how the pricing works. So in those models, you would have a price and you would also have a rebate, right? Very good question.
Thank you for this wonderful talk. I wanted to get your thoughts on what's going to happen with Medicare negotiating prices. Has been all over the news, and kind of what do you think are going to be some of the challenges that we're going to see popping up?
Right, that's an interesting question. I haven't really looked much into this, so it's just my sort of thoughts on these. Usually they're pretty tricky. And think about, I think for any of these, I think it's great research opportunities because that when you sort of impose something, sort of Medicare is so giant, right? When you sort of impose something, you have to think about how the manufacturers or how the insurers or how the other parties are going to respond. So what happened in that outcome-based one is exactly this, right? So the manufacturers actually say, well, we're going to have an outcome-based pricing now. So it sounds very appealing, right? I don't have to pay for this drug until and after, and unless that it's effective on me, right? But the problem is that then the manufacturer now have the sort of the leverage, right? Because they rebate you, the leverage to increase the price, right? And then, so in fact, that's what we have seen from the model, and that's what we have seen, when we use the sort of the model and look at the decision, the numerical study that we can actually quantify. Based on our model, we can actually quantify it, and that's exactly what happens. So I think these are great questions, but you just have to think about, every entity is going to respond to whatever that you are going to do, because it's not sustainable if some of the entity is not Pareto improved. That's why we took a Pareto improving contracting perspective, right? Very good question.
Maybe that last question here. So I'm curious about what is the impact of online illicit pharmacies and how can we really solve that problem? I think you mentioned that. I'd love to see your opinion.
Yeah. So I didn't know that until that I really looked into try to research this question. Right. There is just because I think I mentioned some of the challenges that are there. I was invited by the FDA to be a summit speaker, And they were trying to use sort of data-driven stuff to help with this one. But at the same time, it's just very challenging. It has to be a joint effort from law enforcement and, like I think maybe the credit card companies, the industry, the search engines, right? Because like what do people do? Like you would, if you need to buy a high price drug and you just go online and say, buy this whatever drug online. And then you would see like a list of a lot of these pharmacies come up. And then you would click into that. We actually did a lot of that. And then you find like, so many of them are actually illicit. Like one thing is that if they do not require prescription for a prescription drug, you pretty much already know that they're illicit. So in terms of resolving this problem, I'm not exactly sure there's a very like short answer to that question. I think it's open question, like, welcome all kinds of thoughts. What I have seen that research in this area, again, like research isn't just from our field. Like our field actually very limited. Like I was not even able to publish in our field for that piece. We did several years of that work and couldn't, our field has a certain sort of flavor that they like. What I've seen that in the medical informatics area is that people are looking at social media stuff and and those kind of things. There's quite active research that. So I think the data-driven stuff might be able to help this as well. We did data sort of a web analytics to help this one. Our goal was mainly to focus on to identify these online pharmacies because, as I mentioned, that they can be very dynamic each day. So how do you identify them? Yeah, but that's an open question. Yeah. Thank you very much. And yeah. And there's a lot going on in this field. I'm glad that people are interested.